Dante's Inferno shaped so much of the way that we view hell and the way that it is known. And a lot of us, we carry that image in our head. Some of us still think that it's a torture chamber underground run by a red guy with horns and a pitchfork. And I'm here to tell you today that is not what the Bible teaches us. We picture people screaming, chained up, tormented by demons, surrounded by fire. That's not what hell is. And when you build your theology on fear and on fiction, when we look at Dante's Inferno and we can determine our theology from there, all of a sudden you're going to end up with a distorted view of God, a twisted understanding of judgment, and a complete misunderstanding of what is actually at stake. You know, we want to get caught up in the punishment of hell, and is it fire or is it this? Can I tell you what the real punishment of hell is? The real punishment of hell is hopelessness. The real punishment of hell is hopelessness. Yes, hell is described in Scripture as a place of fire, a place of suffering, a place of torment. But it is not just about the pain. It's not just about the fire, the suffering, the torment. It's really about the hopelessness. Hell is the total final absence of God's presence. It is literally the only place that God's Spirit and God's presence does not reside. And that is terrifying. That is something that is uncomfortable. Because it's not about the pain, it's about the separation from God. And where God is absent, listen to me, there is no joy. There is no peace. There is no light, and there's no hope. Pastor, thanks so much for encouraging me this morning. This is fantastic. Which brings me to Luke 22. Why do we go up through Luke 22? Have you ever wondered why Jesus was so overwhelmed in the Garden of Eden? Or in the Garden of Gethsemane? Now, I want to be careful here because there's a section of theology that, and of Christians that will make the claim that Jesus went to hell. He descended into hell. And you can certainly infer certain things from Scripture, but however, I'm not convinced that's what the Bible actually says. I'm not convinced that the Bible is saying that Jesus literally descended into hell, although he very well could have. But that's simply speculation. It's not actually something that the Bible explicitly teaches. Does that make sense? But have you ever wondered why Jesus was so overwhelmed in the garden? Why the Bible in Luke tells us that he's literally sweating blood. I don't know if you know this, but that is an actual medical phenomenon that happens whenever you are in such a level of anxiety and overwhelmed and stress that your body literally begins from your pores to sweat blood. At first glance, you might look at this and you might think that it's because Jesus didn't want to get crucified. He didn't want to die. Jesus was afraid of dying. He was afraid of death. But here's the thing with that is Jesus had been preparing for death from the very moment he arrived on the earth. Think about all throughout Scripture, how many times did Jesus prophesy that he was going to die? That he was going to leave this earth, that he was going to be killed, he was going to be taken out. He talked about it openly. He preached it to his disciples again and again and again. They didn't always realize it, but it happened. Jesus was prepared. He wasn't caught off guard by the cross. He didn't come to the moment and go, oh my gosh, wait, I have to die? That wasn't what was afraid of. He was afraid of. It wasn't. Jesus was prepared to die. So in the garden, he wasn't just preparing to die. He wasn't getting himself hyped up, psyched up. What he was actually doing in that moment is he understood the gravity that he was about to be forsaken. He was preparing to be forsaken. I want you to think about that for a moment. God, Jesus, is in perfect unity with the Father, but yet he's about to be hanging on a tree, and he's about to cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? He's not preparing to die. He's preparing to be forsaken. He's preparing to absorb the wrath of God. You know, if you're going to absorb the wrath of God, you know what that has to mean? It means you have to be forsaken by God. Now, I want to be careful here because what I'm not telling you is that Jesus was no longer God. Jesus was fully God and fully man the entire time. However, this is the first time that he was ever forsaken by God, the Father. The Father wasn't necessarily right there. The Father was pouring out his wrath onto him. He was going to experience abandonment, not because of anything that he had done, but because of what we had done. That's why he was overwhelmed, because he knew that he wasn't just worrying about, oh, I'm going to die. He was worried, and he was like, Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me. The cup. It wasn't just a cup of pain. It wasn't a cup of death. It was a cup of suffering. And you know what suffering comes from? In this sense, this is not normal suffering. This isn't your suffering. Let me be clear about something. The suffering, this cup of suffering, is not a worldly, earthly, I'm going through something challenging suffering. It's not laying up in a hospital bed suffering. This is, God has forsaken me, and God's wrath is poured onto me, and I am suffering because of what God has poured onto me. This is something that it's not just surface level. This cup wasn't just pain. He was about to drink the judgment of God. He was about to drink the judgment of God. It was the cup of wrath that the prophets, they spoke about. And in drinking it, Jesus would face what you and I were meant to face because of sin, separation, isolation, and the crushing hopelessness of sin. That's what hell is. And that's what Jesus took on so that we didn't have to. Hell is not just fire, it is forsakenness. Total abandonment by God. And that's what filled the cup that Jesus drank out of. Anybody feel encouraged already?